Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I would dare to say, even if you're not a new leader, you're going to learn about what it takes in order to be an effective leader from the start. So we can still go back and fix some of these things. And we're going to talk about those today because we actually have Darja Gutnick on the show with us today. Darja was born in Russia, but moved to Germany right after the Iron Curtain came down. And she grew up in Germany on the border between the East and the West. In many ways, this impacted her, and she found herself always mediating and translating between different cultures. Growing up, she was significantly influenced by her mom's entrepreneurial drive and self-made woman journey. Darja's mother built an award-winning restaurant from scratch, which has set a baseline for expectations and entrepreneurial achievement. She learned loads from her mother when it came to excellent customer service, but then also watched her mother struggle with the people side of things, building high-performance teams and hiring and retaining talent. As a result, Darja studied organizational psychology to figure out what it takes to build a winning team. After starting her career at BMW Group DesignWorks USA in California, she helped the CEO and her team design cultural rituals that lifted the 165 employees and helped them thrive. Darja moved on to become a strategy consultant at OC&C Strategy Consultants in Europe, where she worked with companies like Google, the Auto Group, Telefonica, and others to optimize margins and identify growth opportunities. Darja became a PhD candidate on the topic of creative performance under pressure at the intersection with leadership, where she won an award for Best Dissertation Proposal, published her work in science journals, and supervised over 60 students on their path to bachelor and master degrees. In her last year her PhD, she collected data from founders of startups studying their approach to becoming or performing under pressure. She got the opportunity to get funding for an idea presented at a conference. She paused her PhD back then and founded her first startup, and her PhD is still on pause. Darja experienced burnout at the end of that startup, got certified as a stress management trainer and team coach, and started her practice. She worked as a self-employed leadership coach with executives from startups that became unicorns and established companies like the German Railway. When she noticed the shift in the leadership behaviors of professionals she was coaching, she spotted the opportunity to build a solution to make leadership education accessible to everyone, especially the new and upcoming generation of leaders. This was the start of Bunch. Darja and her co-founder, Anthony, are building Bunch to help every manager become a better leader in just 2 minutes a day. Her vision is to grow a life learning ecosystem that enables everyone to learn anything with little time commitment. Darja and her husband live in Berlin with their 2 cats. Darja commutes to New York City 6 months out of a year, and both of them love surfing and spending lots of time outdoors. Darja, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
OMG, yes, I'm so ready. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit about the truths of first-time leaders, and it doesn't matter if you have a situation where you're above that, but the reason we're going to focus in on that is because the number and the impact is so massive, especially right now. So Darja, you and I talked and we've identified 5 things that are often misguiding and misleading people. And the first one is first-time leaders, they never have what they need. What do you mean by that?
So when you look into like the general progression of a career, right? You like start out as an IC in some role, like be it engineering, marketing, sales, whatever it is. Typically in the old world, we used to progress through towards management and then like up and above to executive management or something like that. And while this, of course, changed and we have so much more opportunities nowadays to create different career paths and so on, that's still kind of, I think, a flow that many people follow. And like, especially in corporate careers, I think like the corporate progression and the ladder is still there to a degree. And so what typically happens is we have like an IC that performs really well and they're exceeding expectations. And then their manager thinks, oh, that's great. we're going to put Jim into like a team lead position because Jim really knows how our team is working. He's like very close to the team. He's really good for the team and he's like a great teammate and he's excelling at his job. And so let's promote him. It's going to be great for him and his career and his partner and all these things. And so that's how it happens. And so when Jim moves into that role, oftentimes we all are like that. I was like that. I think many people are like that. You kind of expect like you have more recognition. Now, finally, they saw what I'm capable of, right? And then you kind of don't really adjust your behavior and you continue being an IC in a management position. So you continue doing your job. You continue being like cool with your colleagues and you're, exerting like the positive influence, whatever. But like you don't actually put anything in place that your team now needs from you. And neither do you know what they need, or did you understand that you are actually serving them now? So like you kind of like got a new job, the servant job, and you don't know what like the deal is, right? Like what menu do they have and do they need? What exactly are their needs? Like how can you come towards them and so on and so on. And the biggest problem in the situation is that most of the time when teams have this situation when somebody gets promoted out of their own ranks, they also are not very open around their needs, right? Because it's not like this typical like child-parent dynamic that you sometimes have when somebody new moves in and they're already a bit senior in experience. You kind of feel like, they're here to like guide me and help me grow and whatever. But if somebody gets promoted in their own team, it's even double hard. So I think these situations are so difficult to understand, navigate, and really read the dynamics of expectations. And so most people really struggle to even understand for the first 6 months or so what is required from them. And then most of their managers are not having any boot camps, right, in the beginning. They're just like, figure it out. And so I think the bad part about how the world changed, like there's so many cool things I'm excited about how the world changed. But the bad part is that in the old world, which I got to see just a little bit, I'm like one of the first millennials. So like I got to like actually experience this very traditional like leadership development programs of the big corporates. At least there was some sort of like offering, whether I liked it or not, whether it fit my needs, probably not. Doesn't matter. But like there was some forethought around, we promoted Jim now. Jim needs now like this thing, this support, this box, this workshop, whatever it is. At least something was there for you to get started. And now that these formats didn't retire into our new world of work, we basically see that gap widening, that the new Jims are basically not receiving anything. And there is a huge gap. And so they are left with LinkedIn, TikTok, and so on, which generally is not a bad source. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening there, but those are content machines. They're not instructionally designed. The educational value of the content is very like questionable always. And so people notice that too. And we have this weird dynamic where first-time managers, first of all, don't fully immediately understand that they need to do something, change something about their behavior and so on. And once they do, they go to like the sources that they know about, like LinkedIn, TikTok, and so on. And then once they're there, they try some stuff and they see it doesn't work. And so they get discouraged often and disillusioned. And we actually had seen people in our community and also leaders, experienced leaders that work at really successful companies nowadays, even going back in their careers. Like the millennial generation had this like step up and then step down again very frequently because of this disillusionment. And then not knowing what to do with it now, and then going back to IC to like kind of try again a few years later. I think it's a very typical situation that we see right now.
Well, and just to be clear, when you say IC, you're talking about individual contributor. So,
individual contributor, yeah.
So
absolutely.
I just want to make sure that everybody was on the right page. And when you started talking about that, for me, I started thinking about the competencies that are needed. So, and I oftentimes get into the conversation of having to explain the difference between competencies and skills for folks. Because a lot of times we talk about, they don't have the skill. Well, the skills are built on top of competencies.
Yeah.
And I always give the example of being a coach, right? So, if I am a coach that's going to develop leaders, if I don't have a competency in things like business acumen, if I don't have a competency in staff development, problem resolution, if I don't have competencies in that, I can't be an effective coach.
Absolutely. Skill for me is more on the behavioral level. You basically can apply a framework you learned about theoretically, and then you can put it into practice and can do things that then result in results or like impact, versus competencies are more it's almost like a psychological theoretical term, a little bit like the old HR world term, where like, oh, you have a mental model about a specific thing, you like accumulated knowledge about it, and that enables you to then build skills on top of that because you understood, oh, emotional intelligence, for instance, like is, I think, much more of a competency than it's a skill, but like effective listening can be a skill because you then actually display particular behaviors like mirroring, summarizing, and things like that that help you to display a higher level of emotional intelligence and further build up your competency. So I think skills and competencies are also interrelated. They kind of like feed off each other.
Well, they do. And so for me, I try to think of competencies as a well of experience or knowledge. So if my well doesn't have much in it, can I really draw anything out of it in order to help others? And the answer is no. Right.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's really interesting, kind of not to dive too deep into bunch right away, but like, I mean, when you look into the bite-sized type of learning, which also is at the foundation of what we are doing with our AI coaching, it is really nowadays an intersection or an interplay, kind of like a dance between doing something, getting the feedback, and then reflecting upon it. Doing something, getting the feedback, and then reflecting upon it, which is also like the core model of coaching, right? I think what we see in the market nowadays that is very different to before is that you are able to do that with technology enablement in a much more frequent way, and also by simulating and not only life in practice. So like typically we had coaching, real life coaching with human coaches where you go once a week, maybe once every two weeks, you collect your data, you kind of like unpack it, you review all of this, and then you make some action items for your behavior to like build the skill. So you go out again in the real life, you try to practice it a bit, and then you bring back feedback. And so this feedback loop is very slow. It's like every week, every 2 weeks. And what we see with products like Bunch is that you can do this on a daily basis. You can actually change a little thing. You can move a little like insight in your head and then adjust this one little nuance of behavior. So we basically just shorten the loop actually on how you kind of like develop and cultivate your skills over time. And with that, also start building up competencies by reflecting and getting additional context on each of the things that you're doing.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about what oftentimes is referred to as that knowing versus doing gap.
Exactly.
So I may have, read, or I may have watched, or I may have heard, whatever the case may be, but it doesn't mean that I can do. And we have to work on continually closing that gap, because there's some other things when you start looking at that IC, that individual contributor, and putting them into a leader role other than the tap on the shoulder or, the application and review process. And we really have to look at attributes, because it is very different when you start talking about being responsible for the development of others, versus you being responsible for, the execution of whatever you were doing as an individual contributor.
Yeah. And then there is also like this very interesting mix-up, I feel, or mesh-up currently happening, where it almost, in the past, we had team lead level of management was kind of responsible for the doing. It was almost like a project management level, right? Like you're responsible for the work distribution. You kind of need to do updates. You need to connect the team with like the larger strategic picture and so on. But you didn't actually get to do much like of development stuff because that was outsourced to like HR or whatever. And I still think in some of the corporate companies that kind of to a degree still works like that. But we see a big shift in the new companies. And also I think to a degree also in the old world is catching up, so to say. And nowadays, I think the people development part has moved all the way down the ladder. So if you are a first-time team leader, you are absolutely responsible for developing your people. In fact, if you don't, they will leave you within a year or less. Great resignation and restart and so on. So I think this whole part of like people development, not only people skills for conflict resolution, but actual forward-thinking people development, career strategizing became so core and front and center for most people in responsibility. I don't think most companies or people have caught up with that quite yet. I think it's still in development.
Well, you talk about, that's a total mind shift in thinking. So like, for example, there's this book called It's the Manager, which was written by Jim Harter, he was a co-author. But I had him on the Fast Leader show. And he talks about what is needed for today and what is needed going forward. And because what you just said is so true, and they actually apply, statistical impacts to that. So because of not having that within organizations where that person is helping to develop, that relationship with that immediate supervisor. And again, we could pull this and put that anywhere within the organization, but it's that relationship that causes the turnover and the burnout and losses in productivity and everything. And 80 years worth of research, they said, for Gallup in the workplace, 80 years of workplace, is that it's the manager is the biggest problem. And the other statistic that I found quite debilitating is that if anybody is hired from or promoted from that IC role into a leadership role, it typically takes about 6 years for them to get any type of leadership development. So if you stop and think about that, how many people do they burn in the process?
Through. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a massive number. And so it's got to stop. And that means that we have to do a total rethink and reshift. And so then you start getting into, well, how are you actually going to have better learning ROI? Right?
It's kind of like almost when you think about it, you would hire an engineer, right? Like we had a similar situation a few years back when we just saw the kind of revolution around hard skills, and we went from like nowhere in software engineering to almost everyone is a software engineer now, and like we have so many now. It's kind of almost like picking up a person that knew how to operate a computer, aka can talk to people, and putting them into like a computer engineer position and expecting them to not only operate a computer, but write software, test software, understand customer demands, deliver it at a high level, inform stakeholders about it, and really like span the whole complexity of that creation process. Like nobody would do that, right? People don't do that. If you're a serious business, please like train your engineers to a degree at least, or give them mentors. If you are hiring junior engineers, have senior ones that can train. And so we did not have, and we don't have that capacity in organizations when it comes to architecting the human collaboration. But in fact, that's literally the only resort left for us, right? Everything else will be ultimately taken over by technology, but architecting the human collaboration, the relationships, is not so easy to actually do through enable for technology. So I expect that to still be our realm for a few more tens decades of years, I would say, until we get to a point where like maybe a system can actually take that over. And so for that time, in the next 10 years, I think we'll see majorly challenges that companies and leaders and team members in companies struggle with that are surrounding that larger like topic of human collaboration, and through that leadership challenges, because that's still our like tool to orchestrate and coordinate human work when it happens together.
Well, I think the reality is that human work is getting significantly more complex, and a machine is not going to take that over. It's just not going to happen. So, all right. So we talked about those first-time leaders. They never really know what they need, right? And then you mentioned something about that they never really think they need it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So we had this like curve that we have painted at like one of the whiteboards in the office before Corona, I remember. And there were like 4 stages, right, of a leader development. So the first one is like you are unaware and incompetent, meaning you don't have the competencies yet, not in a negative sense, but like you didn't acquire the competencies yet, you're unaware of this. And then typically what happens, if you are promoted in that stage, you basically immediately fall flat on your face because something happens. People leave you, people cry in one-on-ones. There is no one-on-ones. People go to your bosses and like tell you that you're like not able to do this and so on. So like really difficult, painful things happen. And they typically happen out of the blue for you because you think everything is going great, but your customers, AKA your team, are actually not happy at all, but they can't speak up towards you because they're not psychologically safe enough. And so that typically catapults you into like, now you're aware that you are lacking stuff. This is a very great stage for interacting with a product like Bunch, because that you're already problem aware. You know the key is in your own development. If you figure out how to grow quickly, you'll get rid of your issues. Like you'll be able to solve your problems, but you need stuff. You need input, you need resources, you need competencies, you need mental frameworks, and you don't have time because you are very stretched at work because you don't have a lot of competencies yet. And so this is like a very interesting stage where we support a lot. And then the next stage is you become basically slightly competent, but you're unaware, like you build up competencies, but you're unaware about your competencies. Lots of people struggle here around with imposter syndrome, and they're not getting promoted and they're not selling themselves well. They lack the confidence. And this is also an interesting stage where we see a lot of our user base kind of like progressing through. And then eventually you come out of like, you know who you are. So you're aware of what you can do. and you have built up some competencies. And then the cycle starts over again if you like kind of level up and your role changes. So as an example for a role change could be you became a team lead and then you kind of were leading that team, you got another team and you need now to actually level up and become VP or even above that. And your work actually changes because you're not leading 18 humans anymore on a daily or like weekly basis. And then you shouldn't lead them directly, but you're not responsible for coordination of work. You're all of a sudden responsible for strategic decision making. And so like what you do on a daily basis is very, very different to what you've been doing so far, even though it's both called leadership. And then you kind of go back to unaware and lack of competencies, and this transitions over. And so I think the two things that we can do for our first-time managers, if you're leading any or if you're thinking of promoting them, is to help them become aware by giving them really, really good feedback and encouraging everyone to give feedback, and also working with assessments and working with like the competency modeling techniques that we know from the old world, which are completely still fine. The assessments are actually not bad at all. It's more what you do after, and then basically give them the resources. And oftentimes, I think what companies also are not registering is that resources typically come from outside of the company. You can try to get them inside, like mentors and kind of establish relationships. But very often I have seen founders doing extremely well when they tapped into their networks to provide mentors from the outside of the company and actually bringing people in from different companies to help your team leads excel in their roles, which worked interestingly, amazingly well from the few case studies that I've been able to tap into.
Well, you know, when you start talking about it, there was actually a paper written called Unskilled and Unaware. There's also differences in regards to gender interpretation of unskilled and unaware. You know, if you look at the body of work and research that went behind being unskilled and unaware, typically, you know, males will overinflate or think that they are actually performing better than they are, and females underinflate.
Exactly.
So that adds a whole different dynamic within itself. Now those aren't hard, you know, fast, you know, findings, but that's the majority. I mean, you will have exceptions, of course. But when you start looking at, okay, the whole learning journey, you talked about the legacy methods that have been leveraged. The fact is, for first-time leaders, they're not going to learn everything that they know and have the magic wand, you know, come out and make them better leaders by doing the learning within a 4-day workshop. Absolutely
not. Also, none of the people that we work with and that we are interviewing as our users and so on are ready to do that. In fact, about 5 years ago, when I started my consultancy and I kind of like decided to go into that leadership development space, I actually noticed the shift in consumer behavior back then. We're only now talking about, you know, lifelong learning, and it's all over the media when you're like into that type of thing, and bite-sized learning is all over. But it really took us a few years to realize, but the preferences and the needs of people changed effectively with the media consumption preferences. So when people stopped reading long books and are not reading like 2 hours of newspapers in the morning anymore, but more like checking their Twitter feeds and LinkedIn feeds when they're like on the way from one meeting to another, like that's when actually the kind of sparkle happened, that we actually need to rethink how we deliver the content. So the content isn't necessarily bad. There were some adjustments as well. I think what we see is, as I mentioned, the human skills kind of taking over the complexity managing skills and the problem solving skills, even though those are still important. But it used to be, I think, more important that you're able to like, you know, communicate well with stakeholders, but at the same time, really like understand complexity very well and be able to come up with creative ideas. And I feel that we shifted a little bit more towards a collaborative skill. So it's really important that you can coach. It's really important that you have emotional intelligence. It's really important that you are able to resolve conflicts between others and mediate and all of these things. So there is a slight shift in content, but to be fair, that's not the innovation. Like it's still kind of, we're still building on stuff we learned throughout the last 150 years. What radically changed is that people do not want to sit in a room with a teacher, AKA the coach. Don't get me wrong, dear coaches, coaching is really great, but I think the way we were interpreting team coaching is in particular, and I think especially, training as well, was really a kind of like finding its end in the last couple of years. And what we see right now is that people really just want to be met where they're at. So be it in Slack, be it on their phone, be it when they, you know, have when they're going for a walk and they want to just listen to something for 10 minutes. So I think these type of consumer behaviors and preferences really drove the agenda on the learner's end, like what they were looking for when they were looking for actual learning offers. And the market is just catching up with it right now. There's Bunch, there's a few other people in that space as well that are really going for like bite-sized lifelong learning offerings. But it's really new still, if you think about it.
Well, part of what you're talking about is that different approach. It used to be thought of that when you think about leadership development, that there would be some type of trickle-down effect that would occur. So in other words, the investment was taking place at the executive level, and that if, and we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and that if we do that it'll trickle down through the organization.
Professional L&D market.
Pardon me?
120 billion, I think, is the like global L&D market.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's huge. But the thought is that if we give it up here, that'll trickle down, ultimately getting down to the front line. And that's not what happens.
That doesn't happen, no.
But then the other thing is when you start looking at the investment numbers, people are saying, well, up here, I only have to put, for example, 10 people through a program.
Yep.
Down here, I have to put 5,000 people through a program.
Exactly.
And they're like, whoa.
And now the like 50,000 underneath those also do want development because otherwise they're going to leave their jobs. That's literally a situation I think the companies find themselves in today.
That's very true. And so the traditional learning university model,
yeah, that's kind of outdated. And so I think luckily we see a huge, renaissance of like the ed tech, what we call it, like educational space. A lot of really good founders are moving into that space, are really trying to like crack down on these like very established like norms and the ways how we used to learn and so on. And there is really exciting stuff happening, I think, around specifically when we look into like even more newer than bite-sized lifelong learning, like Web 3.0 concepts, where you actually have learning coins, you kind of get incentives for learning, and you actually can reinvest those again. And I think it's really interesting to see what's going to happen in that space in the next 3 years. It's a really, really, really good time we're living in. And I'm really hopeful and excited about the solutions we'll find. I'm really looking forward to all the different approaches we'll validate and hopefully will work for us.
Well, I think the approach that's really taking hold slowly but surely is actually to have a blended learning approach. So there is a place, potentially for a workshop. There is a place, for micro learning. There is a place, for, community. There is a place, and these are all modes and modalities by which people will learn.
Exactly.
And you're talking about, getting into the next thing. We mentioned that you talk about, okay, so we say that they never have what they need. They never think they need it. They can't learn what they need at a 4-day workshop. But then the other thing is community influences them and educates them to a very significant degree. Exactly.
So when you look into like the current Gen Z millennial professional workspace where people from those generations are working, what you see often is when you ask them, who do you learn from, or who are your role models, or like what type of lessons learned did you consume in the past couple of months? And oftentimes you'll really get social media influencers, because also, of course, our thought leaders are very active on social media. Obviously, Adam Grant is huge, but also Brené Brown like did a lot for the space. Amy Edmondson, who was like pioneering psych safety and so on. There were a few really great scientists that also bridged the gap into the mainstream and translated a lot of like the research heavy very complex type of content into like consumable bite-sized content on social media. And that really drove, I think, that like mindfulness at work ship forward. And I'm really a huge fan of that type of work. I think you mentioned this in my intro. Like I never saw myself as someone who, just like the groundbreaking research in isolation and like one black box, like thought about it for 5 years, now came out with it. I think my thing was always to mediate, and I'm really creative, but like in a connecting the dots type of way. So if I talk to you right now about this, and I go to like another podcast after, and then I start connecting the dots and like seeing patterns, this is typically what I can contribute to the field. And I think what I'm seeing is that there is more and more of that bridge gap work happening on the science side, but also on the actual learner side. And this is really, really exciting. And so that leads us to a different dynamic, like away from, well, Jim is my like leadership coach, and I go to Jim, and if I have a question, I write him. Now, I can go to 5 other people, and they're not coaches, they're professionals. Maybe they're one step ahead of me, maybe they're one step behind, but I assume that they have a perspective on my challenge that can really, really help me. And so community really becomes a place where you meet potential thought leaders, so people that are more senior than you, that you kind of can approach as experts. But community also is a place where you meet peers that have been in similar shoes before, whether in your perspective or like in the other side's perspective. It can help you to figure out a path forward, because we now finally, I think, understood that there is not just one way of doing things at work. There's not one way to lead. There's not one way to build effective companies. There are multifolds of ways, modules, as you call them, which is absolutely true. And now we need to figure out like decision trees based on which we will decide which module to pick at what point in time. And this is where technology can really help us. But I think we are still a bit early in that regard, that we still struggle with like simple decisions. Even look at like returning back to the office and homework kind of dilemma that most companies right now in the US are going through. And it's really an easy problem if you think about it, right? It's very resolvable. You probably need to have some different tracks for some different user segments. Some prefer at home, some prefer in the office, some prefer a mix. But it's still so difficult to put in practice because scale. And so I think the big chunk of work that lies ahead of us is to create infrastructure and systems that allows us to build communities in a dynamic way. So like bring people together that have a shared topic interest at a specific point in time, can learn from each other and then dismantle again and can go off again. So everything that helps that, I think, will have a really great chance of success in the next couple of years.
Well, I think all this leads into what you had, capped this off with in regards to the truths about, first-time leaders, is that they want to learn on their own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had today or 2 days ago, I had user feedback coming in of a person, and we really designed the product. It's a mobile app first because we did lots of user research and we understood people are learning for themselves. It's their learning. It's their career. It's not their employer's career. It's not their employer's learning track. So like none of that can work. So we need to really start with the consumer. We did that. And now we're seeing more and more feedback coming in from like, I now want you to live on the tools I use at work. I love the app, but then there is times during the day where I'm using Slack, for instance, or where I'm using other communication tools. And I want Bunch to be there too. Please make it so. And we're like, yeah, makes perfect sense. Of course. Thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely. And I think it's really for us as suppliers and as innovators as well, a really interesting challenge, because as the learner preferences kind of like modularize, as the workers' preferences modularize, we also have more complexity now to serve different channels and kind of like create one coherent experience for our learner consumer that can kind of spread and bridge multiple places where they move through during their workday, which is a really interesting challenge. We're really excited about that.
The challenge is also that the need and demand is well ahead of the investment in regards to what organizations are doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one part is kind of like understanding the needs and really how they, in the hope there is some segmentation going on, because if you deliver to 5,000, if you have 5,000 employees, to deliver to 5,000 different use cases, it's going to be impossible currently to even do that and attempt to do that. But I think a lot of the work that has been done over the past years, where we work with personas and segments and like tools from the agile space in the personnel and like the people development field, I think will pay off now, because clearly the solution lies in understanding different groups within your employee circles and kind of understand how to serve those better.
Well, I mean, okay, so you got a lot of things going on, and you've had a lot of things going on. Now you still have a PhD that's pending.
OMG, yeah. I think that's like my like project for like when I'm 60 or whatever. Call me out on that. But I do like the academic world. I don't really know whether it's still on pause, like I sometimes joke about it with my supervisor, and like it's yet to be seen when it's going to continue and how it's going to work. But I'm not stressed about it, because I think as for many people nowadays, like my path didn't lead in the traditional career sense, and I really, really struggled to see myself, despite of the achievements that I could make very quickly. So I had this like challenge that I was a good academic, but like I didn't really enjoy the part where you're trapped in your like kind of really secluded and exclusive type of environments, and you really don't, people are not pushing themselves to translate, so that it gets accessible. And like that lack of accessibility to the mainstream really, really bothered me for a very long time. And I eventually decided I'm better serving as a bridge builder between the academics and the scientists that actually find out what we need to know next, and making sure that that knowledge hits the mainstream and like reaches everyone everywhere. And I think that mission I'm really passionate about. So as long as I keep working in that domain, I'm not so stressed about missing out on the big title. But yeah, let's see what happens with that.
All right, so let's look at that. Okay, so you have all these things going on. If you had one goal, what would it be?
I want to reach everyone in the world that wants to learn about human skills at work and make sure they have a bunch and they can do that.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Darja, Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Darja, are you ready to hoe down?
Okay, I'll try. Let's do it.
So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Not enough time spent in learning.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Be self-aware above everything.
What is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Genuinely bunch, not lying.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre.
Range is a good one.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information on today's show by going to fastleader.net and doing a search for Darja. That's Darja. Okay, Darja, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you've been given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Understand my limitations better and team up with people that are good in those things. Earlier.
Darja Gutnick, I had a good time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Very easy. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn with my name both. So Darja Gutnick. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you because I really enjoy connecting with people about all sorts of people nerd stuff and tech stuff. So reach out.
Darja Gutnick, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.